Hey, it's Prospector Jess again from huntingforgold.com. And I've got a question on the board here that comes up quite often. Where does gold go during a storm? You see, gold is moved around on the surface of the earth by water primarily, and man. But the big focus here is going to be on water, because what we're looking for is where the gold moves from lode, which is the host rock, into the stream beds to form nuggets and coarse gold deposits as well as flour. Fine gold, so fine that it floats on the surface if it has a chance to. So the question we're dealing with is, what happens in a flood? And what should I do and what should I look for when I look at a stream bed to understand where gold will be? Because that's what you want to do. When you find gold, you find where gold will be. You want to dig into that and pull out the gold. Because it's not just about hunting for gold, it's about finding gold too. First, let's take a look at the stream diagram. So this flow, shown in blue here, is a wandering stream or meandering stream. Now, streams have meanders. Some streams just have jagged rocks because they're coming down steep inclines. Each stream has its own fingerprint, and you want to follow that fingerprint to understand where gold is going to go. But to start with, let's just take a look at flow in a curvy basin, okay? And that'll get you some ideas. So the solid lines show the stream in low flow. This is typically spring and summer flow after the rains have gone. The dashed lines show where the stream goes if it floods, if it fills up to capacity and beyond. And that's the kind of flood that moves gold. Typically, not every year will there be a flood strong enough to dig into the bedrock, dig down to bedrock where the gold will be hiding, and find the gold and move it downstream further. But if a flood happens so big that it starts to move boulders and big cobbles, something this big or bigger, sometimes as big as a house, that's a flood that can move gold, because it's going to scour out the river and scour out the stream bed and push anything that's on it downstream. And it doesn't always push on the gold directly with the water. What it'll push on is something like a boulder that'll smack the gold and move it downstream. And that tumbling action is called saltation. That tumbling action in the water basically is what makes the gold round and smooth into nuggets. But suffice it to say right now, we're going to look at that. So that's this wider area, the dashed area. This narrow area is what you see typically when you're prospecting, because of course you don't want to go prospect when there's a flood going on. It's very dangerous. Water can be up to 800 times more effective at moving you for a given speed than air. So if you're thinking about getting into water that's moving at a couple miles an hour and trying to hold up against it, all you have to do is multiply by 800 and you see the problem very quickly. So a water moving downstream in a flood can be moving at several tens of miles an hour, sometimes 10 or 15 miles an hour, and that would carry anything downstream, including these big boulders. You're not going to be able to hold up against it. So wait until the water goes down. But you're going to have to find out some information. We'll cover it later as to what happens when that water goes down, because there's still clues left as to where the water was. So as the water meanders downstream and follows this S curve, something interesting happens during high water, and that is the gold tends to be deposited somewhere upstream. We'll just call it some mysterious place called the source. That could be another placer deposit, another stream, or it could be a lode deposit that's actually bordering on the stream. Or it could be a lode deposit that deposits in another stream that leads to this stream. Either way, we'll just call it the source. The gold enters the stream upstream somewhere. As it enters, the water begins to interact, and the gold starts following a trail that pretty much slices across these points. Now the reason why it slices across the points and it crosses the middle of the stream in between is quite simple. And that is, there's some action going on in the water and how it flows that causes the gold to be swept into a nice streak. So distribution, it's not quite a straight line. There will be a range of gold concentrations, either side of which will be relatively low, but in the middle will be quite high enough that a gold pan can easily pick out the pieces, and it can be quite profitable if you're in one of these areas. They call this a pay streak. The pay streak primarily follows this kind of line because of how the water turns a corner. Helical flow will cause the water to sweep the gold into neat lines. It'll also affect how cobbles and boulders form on the shoreline. Primarily, it sweeps them into nice little piles right in these areas. So wherever there is a bend, the inside of the curve, which is slow, and the outside is fast. Okay? So when we're talking slow and fast, this is in flood. So clear out to these dashed lines. The slow side, wherever it slows down just enough, is where the gold will start to fall out and deposit. It's going to sift through the material as it's tumbling down the stream and deposit itself as close to bedrock or a false bedrock, if it's clay or a concreted material. It'll sit on top of whatever it can't move through during those high flows. So what you're going to be looking for are these little bends. And then primarily where you're going to start working is on the leading edge, as well as through the trailing edge of these bends. So this area, this area, this area, and this area. And what you're going to want to do is start sampling across these in a fashion that finds that streak, that line. If you go down and you're not following the right area, you can be within a foot of a really serious concentration of gold and you won't find it, typically 3 feet. You'll oftentimes find colors, a few flakes of gold in your pan, but you won't find any serious amounts. But if you go crosswise, and we'll talk about that later in sampling, then you can start finding where the gold is. So this is the thing you want to watch for, is these bends, and basically you want to go and find these areas and start working them. And I'll have more on that later about how you can identify where the bends are, which ones are the best looking bends, and what anomalies in the stream bed might trap gold. More on that later. Hi, it's Prospector Jess again. Hey, I've got another thing going on. Remember we asked the question, where does gold go? Well, let's answer a few more questions about that, because that seems to be a pretty important piece. Remember the high water and how it deposits the gold into these little areas that are called pay streaks? What we're going to be looking at here is primarily, why does this gold sweep into these little piles instead of just flooding and flowing downstream with everything else? The answer is in the density of the gold. You see, gold is extremely dense, 19 to 20 times the density of water. And what that causes is, as the gold flows downstream and the water flows downstream, the gold will sink below all of the rocks and rubble. Quartz, major component in most rock. Material that is extremely heavy to some, like concrete, is only specific gravity of 2 or 3. A very heavy rock might be as high as 10. So gold is still twice as heavy, and that's impressive. Take lead for instance. It's only around 10. So the gold is going to sink below everything and go as far down in the column as you can, down to bedrock. That process sorts and sifts the gold and begins to find where the deepest points close to bedrock are, with one exception, and that is where this helical flow takes place. You see, this flow is how a stream turns a corner. And that in itself is an important factor. Because when a stream turns a corner, that flow will actually bend this way. Think of it as a piece of paper. As the piece of paper moves along, it forms a straight line, and then as the flow goes, let me see. Here we go. So let's envision this flow as a piece of paper. Well, I want to turn this corner, but I can't. I have to go in a straight line. But one way to make it turn would be to bend it like this. Now you notice the flow goes over and down, and now it's turned 90 degrees or more. As it turns that corner, the flow bends around. Now you start seeing the action here. Okay, as the flow goes around this corner, it's going to sweep the gold on the bottom into a nice, neat line. That is an important facet of water flow and gold. So this flow is going to make things turn a corner essentially by causing a little, let me do this right. I say this is your stream bed. And the water flow is turning a corner right here. Make a corner here. To turn that corner, the flow is going to have to go along, and then it's going to want to continue in that direction. But what it does is it turns by doing that little knot and bends around this way. But now it's on the bottom, sweeping back toward this shoreline. That causes all the material deposited on the bottom to start getting swept. Think of it as sweeping your garage floor. It starts getting swept over here to this point. And this point, basically, because it flows along the stream bed, it's going to be scouring the material back into this pile. Now remember, high water, the water flow is way up. So as it scours it into this pile, your shoreline gets filled up with large cobbles and heavy sands, big sands. These are gravel bars. More on that later. But as it builds up these gravel bars on the points and bars, little spurs that go out into the water, that's where the gold gets swept underneath. It's going to sweep in and settle to the bottom and hide out until that gravel bar or these could be boulders or cobbles. Those things get swept in high water. So until they get swept again, they're going to hide the gold underneath, pretty much in a line, because it tends to sweep it around and back toward the shore and scour everything in the deep water. And that's why gold typically isn't found out in that outer part of the bend, because that's fast, deep water. This is shallow beach property or rocky, gravelly property. But primarily this area right in here has all the gold swept underneath, and it's nice and compacted. If it's there long enough, it'll actually form what's called concrete. It'll actually sit down with the mud and silt and some of the calcium and harden into a material that's as good as the bedrock, almost as good as the bedrock that it's in. The host bedrock is where you're going to go. You got to get down below all of those cobbles, because remember, the gold is almost twice as heavy as anything in that pile, even though some of those rocks are pretty heavy. Be careful. But the fact of the matter is, because of this, you can actually find the gold under those gravels. But you have to know where to start looking. So that's important to understand, that scouring action of helical flow will cause the gold to concentrate on the points and bars in the stream, not out on the far side and deep water, with a few exceptions. Every once in a while, something will happen to change the direction of a stream, and some of this stuff might end up being left under concreted conditions. It might be buried under what appears to be an unusual formation. Never hurts to check, but in most cases, it's going to be out here in the standard location for a pay streak. And that's it for now. More later. So one of the next things I'll cover, this is Prospector Jess again, huntingforgold.com. One of the next things we're going to cover here is the concept of sampling, which basically falls out of that discovery we have about how streams work. And remember, helical flow, but basically you want to do what's called a sample. The places where you sample are these concentrations called pay streaks. You're looking for where the pay streak is at its highest. So when you're looking at the stream flow, the material sweeps, as we talked about before, the material sweeps into these bars and inside points where the where the water just starts to slow down. It's turning over and over as it turns the corner, and it sweeps the gold into those nice little streaks. You want to start sampling at those points and bars as we talked about. A sample is simply a hole that you start toward bedrock. Usually best to try to sample in areas where you're pretty close to bedrock, or you're going to be digging a very deep hole. It's okay to do that if there is a pay streak, because you'll see there's plenty of gold. You want to be careful though, as these things get deeper, the sides can collapse and it can be dangerous, so be careful out there. Also, it's not wise to dig underneath a bank or underneath dirt, because it can collapse in on top of you, and that would be a problem. It can be life-threatening. So sampling though proceeds in each of these areas in a very methodical fashion. So you want to start tracking how much gold you're finding in your pan, how often that gold is found, so how much gold you find in each pan, how often that's found, and then you want to basically use that information to predict where the gold will go. You're drawing a line, so you're going to be building a map as we go along. More on that later. The basic principle I want to explain here is a sample. You're going to fill your gold pan, you're going to pan it out, and you're going to measure how many flakes of gold you find. This is called colors. The size and count are important. The type of gold can be fine, flour gold, very, very tiny particles. It can even float out, and if you have sunscreen or something on your hand, it can even float out of the pan. You want to be careful about having any oil on your hands at all. Your pan should be clean of any oil. The plastics in them have to be scrubbed out before you start using a gold pan, or it can float out that flour gold. Coarser gold to nuggets is what you're kind of keeping your eye out for. But anything that gives you the color and the quantity is what you want to note. And so you say, I have 5 colors. There's 5 pieces of gold in my pan. Why is that important? Because if I go from 5 to 10 to 50, I'm finding the pay streak. When I find something around there that has a lot of pieces of gold in there, I'm in a serious place that I should investigate further. And at that point, I must go to bedrock each time. But it's also important to note at what level you found the gold, so you can tell what layer it was found in. Each of these are sampling concepts, and we'll cover more of that later. But that's what you want to start doing when you're looking at your gold prospecting stream bed and your claim, because you're going to find areas where the gold is concentrated, and that's where you focus on digging. Don't dig where there's no gold. It makes no sense. And if you just go in and start digging at random, you're going to have to move tons and tons and tons of dirt even to find a little bit of gold. Even if there's a lot of gold in a pay streak, you'll have to move a lot more material than you should. It won't be cost effective, and it'll be backbreaking and not much fun. The goal here is to have fun and have an adventure of a lifetime, hunting and finding gold. That's what we're about. Huntingforgold.com. This is Prospector Jess. We'll catch you later, next time. Hey, it's Prospector Jess here. If you want more videos like this, make sure you go on over to huntingforgold.com. That's hunting4gold.com, where we have additional videos for you only available on huntingforgold.com's site. Check it out, and good prospecting.